Hi, mathletes. We are continuing our discussion of filling in the blanks for linear functions, and our objective remains the same. We are going to find missing values. We're looking in a table or extending that table in either direction, and we're going to use our knowledge of rates of change to do this. We're continuing with the whole class practice, which is the second half of the first page in your guided notes practice. For each table below, fill in the blanks and identify the rate of change, the unit rate, and identify the type of function represented. So always the first thing you do when you see a table is to find the change in x and find the change in y. And remember, you're going to find the change in x between the x values that are given and the change in y values for the values that are given. Hopefully your table matches mine. This is enough information to answer the questions about rate of change, the unit rate, and the function. So I can see that between all of the values that are given, that the change in y and the change in x's are the same. They're constant. So that means that our rate of change is constant. And our rate of change is always the change in y, which in this case is increasing by 10 or positive 10, over the change in x, which is 2. And if we reduce that, we can easily get our unit rate, which is 5 over 1. And of course, if it is a constant rate of change, it's linear. So let's go about filling in the blanks here. We can see that we are going by 2, so it would make sense then that if I'm skipping every other one by 2, that every one would be increasing by 1. So that makes this 13, 14, then 15, 16, then 17, 18, then 19. And so that fits the pattern. And just like we did in the opener, you are skipping every other one. So we have 2 spaces that make up 10, which means each space must make up 5. So 66 plus 5 is 71, then 76 plus 5 gives me 81. 81 plus 5 is 86. 86 plus 5 is 91. Plus 5 is 96. Plus 5 is 101. You're going to do the same thing, always finding the change in x and the change in y when you're given a table of values. So that can help you find your missing blanks. Remember to use the number line if needed. So when you're going from -2 to 1, that is increasing. It's to the right 3 units, and then from 1 to 4 is also increasing by 3 units. Same thing, from 14 to 5 is going to the left, so that's decreasing, or -9 spaces. And 5 to -4, again, you can count those spaces. You're going to the left, that's -9. And so again, we can see that our 2 data points show us that our 2 changes show us that we are in a constant situation. So if it is constant, we know it is linear. Let's go ahead and fill this out. We know that the ratio is going to be change in y, which is -9, over the change in x, which is 3. And again, this reduces nicely for a unit rate of -3 over 1. So as x increases by 1, y decreases by 3. And let's think about filling in our table of values. So if I'm skipping 3 spaces and I have 3 spaces between, I'm going by every 3, it probably is going to go by 1s again. So if I just follow along on my number line, -2 and then -1 and then 0 and then 1, that falls in a line, so that's evenly spaced, that works. And so then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And over here, we have 9 we decrease 9 for every 3, but for 1, that's where we're using our unit rate. If we're only going 1 space, we need to decrease by 3. So you can see that the big space here from 14 to 5 is decreasing by 9, But these little spaces that make up that same are -3, -3, -3, because the combination of those three -3s is, of course, -9. So then you can use that unit rate to write in and calculate those missing values. So 14 minus 3 gives me 11. And again, you can look on our number line. If you want to go down 3 from there is 11. And then 3 more from there gives me 8. And 3 more from there gives me 5. So it matches that same part at the top. You're going to continue to fill in the rest of the table. For question 3, I want you to do the same thing. You always start with your change in X and your change in Y. Looking at our change in X, we see that we get two different values. Feel free to use the number line like I've modeled up here. -8 to +2. From -8 to 0 is 8 units, and then there's 2 more units to get to 2. That's how I'm showing that I'm increasing by 10. Then from 2 to 12 is 10 more. From 12 to 27 is actually 15 more. And if you want to use a number line, you can get a bigger number line online or draw one. And for the Y values, these were much bigger than what would fit on our number line. However, I just showed this first one of -34 to 16. -34, you know, would be way over here. 16 would be somewhere just off this map. And you know you're going from -34 to 16, so you're going to the right. That's why it's addition, because it's increasing. And it's that same idea. From -34 to 0 is 34 spaces. And then from 0 to 16 is 16 additional spaces. That's where the 50 comes from. From 16 to 66 is adding 50. And then from 66 to 141 is adding 75. So that's where those values come. Now, you may notice right away that this is constant, or you may need to calculate the rate of change first. We have two different rates of change to look at. So let's take a look at both of those. You may recognize these from your last lesson, number 3 in your last lesson. So you may have already recognized that these are the same. So we had 50 over 5 and 75 over 15. And we're trying to figure out what those are. And if I divide that on my calculator, I can find that they both have a unit rate of 5 over 1. They both reduce to 5 over 1. So this is, in fact, constant because these two ratios are equal. And if it's constant, then we know it's linear. Now it's time to fill in the blanks. Filling in the blanks looks a little different because our unit rate isn't exactly what we need to look at here. If we're going from -8 to 2, and we only have one extra space between there, we have to split this in half. So instead of looking at 50 over 10, which is double, we need to split this into half. I have 2 spaces that need to make up 10. We've talked about this before, that 5 plus 5 gives me 10. So -8, and if I go to the right 5 units, I end up at -3. And then -3, if I go 5 units, puts me at 2, which is what it should, which is where I'm at. So then we know that each one of these spaces is increasing by 5. So 2 plus 5 is 7. 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 plus 5 is 17. 17 plus 5 is 22. 22 plus 5 is 27. So that plus 5 works all the way down. You can write that in if it helps you remember that, or you can just do it up at the top and then know that you're using that, that your X's are changing by 5 in this table. Our X's change by 1, our Y's change by 5. But if our X's change by 5, what do you think our Y's need to change by? And you can do that also by thinking, okay, I have 2 spaces that need to go 50. And so 25 plus 25 gives me 50. So it makes sense that 25 over 5 would be the relationship that we're looking here. The change in Y is 25. So -34 plus 25 is negative 9. Negative 9 plus 25 is 16. 16 plus 25 is 41. Go ahead and fill that in for the rest of the table. And you can check your answers right here.